A bitter wind sliced across my cheeks, a bone-deep cold seeping out from every joint. I lay in the heavy snow, my limbs long numb. Not far off, in front of the tent, Lucas had Chloe pulled tightly into his arms, shielding her from the whirling flakes. Chloe whispered something into Lucas's ear, then lifted her head and cast a cold, mocking glance in my direction. Beneath their feet was the severed lifeline I'd been using, and the camp wreckage drenched with the blood-scented lure that attracts beasts. From the dark of the snow forest came a low, furious howl. Pairs of ghostly green eyes flickered among the trees. I tried to call out, but my windpipe was full of ice and a thick metallic tang of blood, and only a hoarse rasp escaped. The wolf pack surged like a tide. The searing pain of sharp fangs tearing through flesh swept over me in an instant, and everything before my eyes dissolved into a wash of red. When I opened my eyes again, there was no biting wind, no tearing wolves. Noise came to my ears. I was sitting on the leather couch of a luxurious private jet, a warm cup of coffee steaming in my palms. The LCD screen in front of me showed the date, October 12, 2024. This was the day we were flying to the Alaskan Polar Wilderness Survival Training Camp. Elena, what are you spacing out about? Sign this liability waiver. The speaker was Lucas, dressed in top-tier outdoor gear. He pushed the document toward me with an indifferent expression. Beside him, Chloe wore a white down coat, her eyes rimmed red, looking at me with a seemingly delicate, harmless gaze. In my previous life, Lucas and Chloe had lured me to this camp under the pretense of an air polar assessment. In the uninhabited mountains, they sabotaged my locator and communications, stole my cold weather supplies, and at night used the blood scent lure to bring beasts that devoured me, staging it as an accident to seize the billions my parents had left behind. I picked up the pen and opened the document. Clause 14, in tiny print, read, should a participant die during the training camp, their family conglomerate's preferred shares shall be fully transferred to the fiancé, Lucas. I took the water-based pen at my side and signed the name. As I drew the final stroke, I pressed the nib hard into the paper, letting the jet black ink spread into a wide blot over the clause that tied shares to Lucas, thoroughly masking the legal wording about automatic transfer of equity. Done. I pushed the document back to Lucas. He glanced disgustedly at the stain, but eager to get the signature, he didn't examine it closely and simply closed and pocketed the papers. Elena, you look pale. Chloe stepped toward me in her tall boots, her voice low. This camp's in the no man's land, no signal, no rescue. If you can't handle it, beg me and maybe I'll get Lucas to save you a spot. I rose, studying the white down coat she wore with a cold gaze. That coat suits you. But on polar mountains, wearing white makes it easiest to lose your way. When you die, they won't even be able to find your body. Chloe's face shifted slightly and she took a step back. The cabin PA chimed as the plane descended toward the Vanguard camp airstrip. Team leader Mark walked down the aisle to inspect gear. Everyone must be equipped with a standard-issue satellite locator, a first aid kit, and smoke signal flares, Mark announced gravely. I slung on my black tactical backpack for inspection. The satellite locator's green light glowed. As Mark turned to check the others, my fingers traced along a hidden compartment sewn into the inner liner of the pack. At the bottom of the compartment, I felt a miniature signal jammer and a small reservoir bottle emitting a faint oily scent. These were the things Lucas had secretly slipped into my backpack in my past life. The jammer would spoof GPS signals, and the reservoir was filled with a special fragrance designed to attract polar snow wolves and brown bears. I turned to the side and, taking advantage of the cabin lights dimming for a moment, reached to undo the cover of the backpack Chloe had hung on the seat back. I precisely tucked the miniature signal jammer into the waterproof pocket at the very bottom of Chloe's backpack, then cracked open the valve of the reservoir a fraction and slipped it into the inside pocket of Chloe's tactical jacket. A polar breeze blew in through the gap in the door as the plane came to a stop. Lucas was the first to descend the ladder and gestured toward Chloe. She followed closely behind, a smug smile on her face. I slung my pack on and stepped out the door. In the base cabin of the Vanguard camp, the charcoal fire crackled. Team leader Mark stood at the wooden table and posted a list about the supply allocations on the wall. We're about to enter a dangerous area with no logistical support. Each member needs to inventory their own medical emergency kit and energy ration pack. Mark's voice was hoarse and brisk. Lucas was the first to walk to the supply rack and casually picked up 2 metal cases marked with the advanced emergency medical symbol. He turned to Chloe and naturally placed one of the boxes into her backpack, then picked up the other and walked toward me. Elena, this is your emergency medical kit. Frostbite and trauma are common in the polar region, keep it safe. He handed me the kit, a faint, barely noticeable expectation flickering in his eyes. In my previous life, it was this medical kit that killed me. Before departure, Lucas had secretly swapped the hemostatic gel and antibiotics in the kit. He had replaced them with a pain ointment containing mild anesthetic and counterfeit medicine that would accelerate wound necrosis. More deadly, he had smeared a colorless, odorless animal estrus pheromone on the inside of the case. I reached out and took it, my fingertips brushing the latch on the metal box. A small combination lock hung from the lid. The default code was the camp's standard 0000. Thanks. You thought this through, I said evenly. And in front of Lucas I shoved the medical kit into the outer pocket of my tactical backpack. Seeing me accept it without hesitation, the malignance in Lucas's eyes eased a fraction and he turned away to call the others. I stayed where I was and, shielded by my tactical coat, nimbly turned the code wheels on the medical box. Click, the latch popped open. I slipped my hand inside and felt the tampered inferior hemostatic gel tube and the lining smeared with animal pheromone. I turned and walked to the supply sorting area in the corner of the hall. Chloe sat on a folding chair, fussing over her snow boots. Lucas was a short distance away, discussing the route with Mark, his back to us. Carrying my medical kit, I walked calmly to Chloe's backpack. Her pack was leaning against the table leg, the zipper slightly open. I pulled the medical kit from my own bag, and with extremely quick movements yanked open Chloe's backpack, snatched the medical box from inside, and slipped my own box into it. The whole process took no more than 3 seconds, the moves as smooth as rearranging my clothes. To prevent her noticing anything amiss, I held her original, normal medical kit and sat on the bench in the rest area. I drew the compact tactical knife I always carried and used the tip to gently pry open the lining of the normal kit, taking out several compliant strong analgesic syringes and high-concentration sterile wound spray, which I tacked into the hidden inner pocket of my tactical vest. Then I put several discarded lead weight blocks into the kit I had taken from Chloe's bag, relocked it, and placed it back into my own backpack. Elena, what are you doing? A voice suddenly came from behind. Ethan, Lucas's follower, walked over and eyeing the tactical knife in my hand with suspicion. The leader said modifying equipment without permission is against regulations. I put away the knife, zipped up my backpack, and looked up at Ethan. I was just testing the knife's sharpness. After all, if we run into danger, a dull knife won't cut a survival rope. Ethan paused, clearly sensing a double meaning, but he took me for merely eccentric, snorted, and turned away. At that moment, Chloe came over and reached for the backpack by her desk. When her hand touched the outside of the pack, her fingertip inadvertently brushed the tiny amount of fragrance reservoir I had just smeared on it. She frowned in disgust and wiped her fingers with a handkerchief, not noticing at all that the first aid kit inside had already been switched by me. Everyone get ready. We'll break camp and depart in 5 minutes. Mark's shout rang through the cabin. The team members shouldered their packs and walked outside. The wind and snow outside were stronger than before, the howling wind like a savage moan. Lucas went to the front to lead the team, with Chloe close behind him. I shouldered my heavy tactical pack and walked in the middle rear of the line. On the 3rd day into the polar no-man's land, the boundless snowy plain resembled an endless dead desert. The raging blizzard had fused sky and earth into a cold, lifeless white. The atmosphere within the team was oppressively suffocating. Constrained by the extreme cold and the terrain, the whole group's pace was much slower than expected, and the temperature had already plunged to -35 degrees. The team members' eyelashes, eyebrows, and goggles were all thickly crusted with frost. Every breath came with a sharp, stabbing pain as if a blade were cutting the throat. By 4:30 p.m., the sky had grown completely dark, heavy clouds pressing low along the snowy ridgeline. Team leader Mark waved for the group to stop and rest beneath a huge leeward cliff. Set up camp right here. Move faster. Everyone, Mark shouted. Per polar safety protocol, 2 people must be scheduled for alternating night watches to constantly monitor signs of surrounding wildlife, especially polar wolves and brown bears. Lucas shook the snow from his body, thrust his ski pole into the snow, and moved over to Mark. He glanced at Chloe, who was pretending to clear a tent foundation not far off, then cleared his throat and loudly addressed the gathered team. Everyone, we're all exhausted today, but for the safety of the whole camp, night watches are indispensable. I think our team values sacrifice. Those who haven't carried heavy loads during the day and have been taken care of by others should contribute more at night, right? Before he finished, Lucas's follower Ethan immediately caught the hint and snarked in a loud, mocking voice. Is that even a question? Elena has had the lightest pack the whole way and is the slowest. Everyone's been looking out for her because of Lucas. If you ask me, the coldest, riskiest patrol period in the latter half of the night should be Elena's sole responsibility. Several already exhausted teammates nodded in agreement. The cruelty of the polar environment easily brought out selfish and exclusionary human instincts. If someone could be pushed forward as a scapegoat, the rest could comfortably hide in warm-down sleeping bags. Chloe came over carrying a thermos of hot tea. Her tone was solicitous but every word stung. Sis, Lucas is only looking out for you. If you take part in team safety measures more, people will truly accept you. If you're scared to be alone, I can have Ethan keep you company for a while. But you really shouldn't refuse, otherwise everyone will feel uncomfortable. In my previous life, it was in this same camp. They used identical moral coercion to force me into the late-night watch, then secretly cut off my radio link to the main camp and used scent lure to draw hungry wolves to my patrol point, leaving me for dead. I stopped scraping snow and slowly straightened. My gaze swept over Lucas's hypocritical face, Chloe's malicious eyes, and the indifferent faces of those around us. Have me take the latter half of the night watch? Fine. I spoke. My voice was clear and cold, slicing through the howling wind and snow. However, according to the common safety standards of the International Polar Rescue Corps, IPRC, night patrols in hazardous zones must follow a dual-person parity principle, that is, a regular team member must be paired with a corps member who holds advanced rescue qualifications, and the two must share the same channel for vital sign monitoring and satellite rescue calls. I turned and looked directly at Lucas. Lucas, you are our team's deputy leader and hold an advanced outdoor rescue certificate. In the name of that so-called team sacrifice, and your concern for me, you'll patrol with me tonight in the dead of night. Do you dare? Lucas's expression shifted slightly. His original plan had been to isolate me on the outskirts of the camp and hide in the safe tent to fabricate an alibi. He never expected I'd turn the tables and publicly bind him with professional code. I need to assist Mark with scheduling tomorrow's complex route tonight. I can't get away. Lucas stammered, eyes flickering as he tried to evade. Mark can finish the route scheduling by himself in half an hour. I stepped closer to Lucas, my tone as sharp as a knife. Or is this sacrifice you brag about just a tool to coerce others? When real danger shows up, will you, Your Highness, be the first to retreat? The onlookers' expressions changed. A few seasoned outdoor enthusiasts began whispering, looking at Lucas with suspicion and disdain. Chloe panicked and hurriedly tried to smooth things over. Sister, how can you say that about Lucas? He's thinking about the bigger picture. If you don't want to go, just say so. No need to put it so harshly and ruin team unity. Ruin unity? I sneered and walked straight toward Chloe, my gaze locked on the satellite communication terminal hanging at her waist. Let's talk about real safety risks. Since yesterday, the camp's GPS system has been experiencing frequent frequency drift and signal interference. Mark, didn't you notice? The leader Mark frowned. There have indeed been strong interfering signals. I've been tracing the source. No need to trace it. I pointed at Chloe's backpack. The interference source is in Chloe's bag. Chloe, take out the little black square at the bottom of your waterproof pouch right now. If you dare. Chloe's facade collapsed instantly. Her face went as pale as the snow beneath her feet. What nonsense are you talking about? I only have personal items in my bag. If it's nonsense, open it and we'll see. I gave her no time to destroy evidence, lunged forward, grabbed the outer zipper of her backpack, and yanked hard. The contents spilled across the ground. A black miniature signal jammer fell out of the waterproof pouch, stark against the white snow, its red indicator light blinking rhythmically. Silence fell over the camp. Mark's face went ashen. In a polar no-man's land, secretly bringing a signal jammer was tantamount to deliberately trying to kill the whole team. This isn't mine. I don't know what this is. Chloe screamed, turning to Lucas in panic. Lucas, this isn't mine. Someone is framing me. Cold sweat dotted Lucas's brow. He glared at Chloe and shouted, "Enough! Maybe it got mixed in by accident when packing. Everyone's exhausted, let's deal with this tomorrow." Tomorrow? In a no-man's land, leaving any safety risk until tomorrow is lethal. I bent down, picked up the jammer, and in front of everyone smashed it against a nearby boulder until it was crushed. Since everyone has their own tricks regarding safety rules, tonight's watch will be decided by drawing lots. Whoever draws it goes, no freeloading on others. Night had completely fallen over the no-man's land. The storm lamp in the center of the camp swayed violently in the biting wind, creaking and screeching, stretching everyone's shadows into twisted, grotesque shapes. After the daytime incident with the signal jammer, the already fragile trust within the team had cracked wide open. Chloe had been warned by team lead Mark and put to rest alone in a tent some distance away, while Lucas spent the whole night with a cold face. The cruelty and murderous intent in his eyes seemed ready to spill out. At 1:03 a.m., a very faint rubbing sound came from the camp's supply stove area. I sat in the darkness of my tent, peering coldly through the slightly opened zipper. A slender figure was creeping toward the supply pile, Chloe. She glanced around in panic as she slipped a small, colorless glass vial from the inside pocket of her down jacket. She deftly opened the thermos stopper and dropped the liquid into one of the red insulated flasks marked with a special yellow sign. That was the drinking water flask Mark had designated specifically for me. After dripping in the drug, Chloe quickly screwed the thermos cap back on, returned it to its place, and then bolted back to her tent like a frightened rabbit. I stepped out of the tent, my combat boots pressed on the packed snow without making a sound. In an extreme polar environment like this, the deadliest poisons are often not strong acids or alkalis, but chemical agents that cause central nervous system paralysis or disrupt thermoregulation. What Chloe had just dropped in was a potent neuroinhibitor, an atropine-like derivative, colorless and tasteless, that would cause severe hallucinations and limb rigidity within half an hour and ultimately lead to death by hypothermia in sleep. In my previous life, it was drinking from this poisoned flask that left me utterly defenseless in the snow, at their mercy. I walked to the supply table and placed my hand on that red thermos. But I did not pour the water out, nor did I shout to expose her on the spot. Without catching her in the act, an accusation could be brushed off. Chloe could easily claim it was an ordinary emergency drug. I picked up the red thermos and looked at the neighboring blue one, the flask belonging to Ethan, Lucas's loyal follower. Ethan jumped highest during the day and was Lucas's go-to man for all the dirty work. With practice movements, I disassembled the insulated shells of both flasks and swapped them. The markings on the shells were exchanged, so the bladder containing the poison water naturally became Ethan's designated drink, while the clean water that had been Ethan's was now inside my red flask. After finishing, I returned the flasks to their places, took out my tactical knife and scored an almost imperceptible mark on the bottom of Ethan's flask, then wiped away my footprints and returned to my shelter to rest. The next morning, the blizzard still howled. The world was a white blur. Team members emerged from their tents one by one to sort their gear and take a final caloric top-up before crossing the glacial chasm. Ethan grumbled over to the supply table, grabbed the flask with the blue mark and cursed, "Damn polar weather. I'm freezing to death." He complained loudly as he opened the thermos and tipped his head back, gulping down several long swallows of the hot sweet tea. Chloe watched him closely from not far away. When she saw Ethan drink, there was a flash of shock in her eyes, and she immediately looked at me. Seeing me calmly sipping the clean water from my own flask, her face went ashen in an instant. She looked struck dumb, her legs trembling uncontrollably. Only 20 minutes later, the team had just finished assembling and was about to set off for the glacier gorge. Ethan, who was walking among them, suddenly stumbled and fell heavily to the ground. "Ethan, what's wrong?" Lucas ahead frowned and turned to demand. Ethan lay in the snow, his eyes rolled back, breathing wildly rapid, white foam constantly spilling from the corners of his mouth, his limbs convulsing violently as if having spasms. I'm cold. So hot. Wolves. So many wolves are biting me. He screamed piercingly, clawing at his cheeks uncontrollably and leaving streaks of fresh blood. Leader Mark rushed forward to check Ethan's pupils and pulse. His face changed abruptly. Acute central nervous system poisoning. Severe hallucinations and loss of temperature regulation. Quick! Get the first aid kit. The team instantly fell into chaos. Mark grabbed the canteen hanging at Ethan's waist, opened the cap and sniffed, then dipped a drop with the toxin test strip he carried. The strip immediately turned a violent deep purple. There's a powerful toxin in his water. Mark barked, his gaze sweeping the group like lightning. Who put poison in his canteen? All the members instinctively took a step back, filled with suspicion and fear toward one another. Chloe's legs gave out completely and she slid down into the snow with a thud, trembling violently. She knew she had poured the poison into the red flask with her own hands, but now that poison had somehow appeared in Ethan's canteen. Lucas looked even sullener. Ethan was his right-hand man, and with him openly poisoned in the team, everyone's eyes on Lucas were now filled with scrutiny and caution. Team leader Mark. My cool voice broke the stalemate. I stepped forward and pointed at the scratch on the bottom of Ethan's canteen. Last night I saw Chloe lingering alone near the supply pile for a long time. If anyone doubts me, you can check Chloe's pockets. She should still have the small glass vial that held the reagent. At my words, Mark's gaze snapped to Chloe. Chloe, turn your pockets out. No! It wasn't me. I didn't! Chloe screamed. In a panic she fumbled in her pocket for a handkerchief, but accidentally pulled out the empty miniature glass reagent vial, which clinked and dropped onto the cold ice. The evidence was ironclad. Chloe! You actually poisoned a teammate's drinking water? Mark exploded with anger, stepped forward, stripped Chloe of all her gear, and bound her hands behind her to her snow poles with restraint straps. From now on, you are deprived of all freedom of movement. Once we reach the next contact point, you will be handed over to the authorities immediately. The team dragged the poisoned, unconscious Ethan, struggling through the blizzard toward the depths of the canyon. The weather deteriorated sharply along the way. Biting winds laced with ice crystals struck the goggles. By 4 in the afternoon the sky was as dark as ink. I lagged half a step behind the group, crouched and faked tightening my crampons. As I scooped up a handful of snow, my fingertips brushed rough rock grooves beneath the snow, paw prints left by large polar wolves and brown bears that regularly trod the canyon floor, and a few strands of recently shed gray fur clung to the bark of nearby pines. More importantly, a pungent smell of sulfur and low pressure faintly pervaded the air, the classified sign of an approaching polar black blizzard. In my previous life, that storm would strike at midnight tonight, accompanied by a surge of wild animals attacking the camp and causing catastrophic destruction. I stood and walked over to the leader, Mark, my voice calm and clear. Leader Mark, these tree trunks have deep animal gouges, and there are blood-stained ice marks under the snow. This is a migration corridor for polar wildlife. We absolutely cannot camp at the canyon bottom. Mark stopped and looked around grimly. However, Lucas suddenly sprang forward. With Ethan poisoned and Chloe bound, he was eager to seize control of the team again and was desperate to manufacture an accident that would kill me. Elena, stop scaring everyone. Lucas ripped off his mask and sneered scornfully. You're just an amateur without even an advanced outdoor certificate. Who are you to boss us around? This canyon floor is flat and backed by boulders. It's a natural wind shelter. If we climb up to the ridge, the team will be overexerted. Who will take responsibility? He turned his head and, in a low voice, whispered into Mark's ear to fan the flames. Mark, the training camp insurance agreement is clear. If someone panics and the route is changed causing delay, you, as the chief safety officer, will be liable for breach compensation. Besides, we're only one step away from our planned objective. The high insurance penalties and compensation clauses were a trap Lucas had calculated long ago. He counted on Mark being short of money and on greed clouding judgment. Mark's gaze wavered, and he ultimately compromised between survival risks and breach fees. Lucas has a point. We'll camp on this canyon floor tonight and increase night patrols, Mark announced through gritted teeth. Hearing the decision, a faint, hard cruelty tugged at the corner of Lucas's mouth. He thought he'd successfully lured the whole team into his preset death trap. If the animals attacked tonight, He could use the chaos to kill me and Chloe and take the large insurance payout and family inheritance for himself. But he had no idea that all of this was part of my plan. The camp was erected quickly. Because Chloe was bound, she was kept in the smallest tent at the edge. Lucas pitched his tent in the very center of the camp, the most sheltered spot. Night fell and the temperature plunged to -40 degrees. The wind howled through the valley like a beast. Taking advantage of handing out heat packs and cold weather rations, I moved among the tents with a composed expression. Passing Chloe's tent, I peered through the seam at her curled in the cold sleeping bag, shivering. On the inside of her tactical jacket a faint but pungent lure scent wafted, the death sentence I had secretly applied for her on the private plane. Then I walked toward the camp's core supply storage. I casually drew my tactical knife and, under the cover of adjusting the guy lines, cut through 2/3 of the steel cable anchoring Lucas's tent, leaving only a few dangling steel fibers. Next, I took out the high-grade polar animal repellent spray I had prepared earlier and evenly applied the purified capsaicin with its strong, acrid smell and the deterrent around my own tent and on the windskirt. After doing all that, I sat in my tent, zipped it up, and glanced at my tactical watch. The hands pointed to 11:40 p.m. The wind outside suddenly changed, shifting from a bone-chilling north wind to a howling, violent canyon gust. From deep in the distant woods came a low, savage, hungry wolf howl. Then a second, a third, countless ghostly green points of light sparked along the edge of the dark snow forest, like a dense spread of will-o'-the-wisps. 10:50 p.m. The howls outside the camp grew more frequent. A bloody, foul wind funneled through the geological fissures into the gorge, making the windproof tents flap violently. I tore open the autonomic nervous system stimulant test strip I had prepared and placed it under my tongue. An intense bitterness spread instantly. My heart began pounding wildly. My pulse shot up to 180 beats per minute. My temperature spiked above 40 degrees Celsius under the drug's effect. My breathing became extremely rapid, and cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Then I pulled out the tactical knife I always carried and without hesitation slit the skin of my left arm. Blood poured out, instantly staining the entire sleeve of my down jacket red. I forced the tent zipper open with all my strength, stumbled out, and fell heavily at the entrance of the team leader Mark's tent. "Rescue, rescue," I moaned, weak and agonized, my face as pale as paper, my whole body convulsing violently. Mark rushed out at the sound. Seeing me covered in blood, pupils dilated and my temperature terrifyingly high, his expression changed immediately. He grabbed a thermometer and a vital signs monitor and pressed them to me. The numbers on the screen leapt into the fatal red zone. Acute polar septicemia compounded by an autonomic storm. "We must initiate emergency air evacuation immediately," Mark shouted, yanked the highest level distress flare and fired it. A crimson flare streaked across the night sky. According to international polar survival and rescue rules, once a team member develops an irreversible acute life-threatening condition, the safety officer must unconditionally call the mountain helicopter station nearby for forcible evacuation. Any contract breaches or personal objections are void. Lucas barreled out of his tent at the roar. Seeing the helicopter's powerful searchlight cut through the night, he rushed over, face ashen, shouting, "Mark, are you crazy? It's just a minor injury, why call a helicopter? Forced evacuation will trigger breach liabilities. Our hefty insurance payout will be gone. Human life comes first. No agreement outweighs safety." Mark shoved Lucas aside and escorted me toward the descending rotors. Protected by the rescue protocol, I naturally received my full set of luggage and recording equipment. Just as the helicopter's winch basket lowered onto the snow, a violent gale roared and a black blizzard tore the night apart. The thick scent of bloodlusting fragrance spread wildly from Chloe's tent in the storm. Carried by the wind, dozens of pale green, murderous eyes in the forest went completely mad. "Awoo!" With a heart-rending roar from the alpha wolf, scores of huge, starving polar snow wolves and frenzied brown bears broke through the snowy woods like a black tide and surged toward the camp. "Beasts are attacking! Beasts are attacking! Grab the shotguns!" The team screamed in despair. The camp instantly descended into blood and chaos. Terrified, Lucas ran for his tent. But the tent whose 2/3 of its anchor points I had cut earlier collapsed with a thunderous crash under the gale and the bear's violent impact, pinning him under heavy debris and snow so he couldn't get free. Farther off, Chloe, bound to a tent pole, let out the most pitiful screams. "Brother Lucas! Save me! The animals are tearing at my leg! Help me! I don't want to die here!" The wolf pack ripped at Chloe's tent. The screams and the sounds of beasts tearing flesh and bone sounded especially brutal in the cold night, echoing across the valley. I sat in the helicopter's basket, slowly winched upward into the night. Through the gale and the window, I looked down from above at the camp turned into a hell on earth. Lucas let out weak, struggling cries for help beneath the collapsed tent. Chloe screamed repeatedly as the wolves tore at her, and the entire team was routed by the beast tide, scattering in all directions. The helicopter's engine roared loudly, carrying me through the clouds toward the absolutely safe base camp down the mountain. The helicopter landed on the helipad of the mountain rescue base. Medical staff immediately rushed me into the emergency room, but as soon as I was out of immediate danger, I refused anesthesia and any further IVs. In front of the attending physician and the Polar Search and Rescue Police who had arrived, I briskly tore off the protective bandage on my arm, revealing a tiny wound already staunched with a hemostatic strip. "Why, your vital signs have stabilized?" The doctor stared, dumbfounded, at the suddenly steady numbers on the monitor. "I don't have polar sepsis." I unbuttoned my coat and took from my inner pocket the well-sealed black box memory card and a full set of high-definition audio-video files. I escaped from a carefully planned murder and an illegal insurance scam. I plugged the memory card directly into the rescue base's main computer and contacted the International Polar Rescue Organization, IPRO, the Insurance Investigation Bureau, and the local Polar Legal Oversight Authority on the spot. The screen immediately played everything recorded over the past few days. Footage of Lucas secretly assembling a signal jammer and cutting off external rescue communications. The complete process of Chloe pouring a potent neurotoxin into my red thermos. Lucas confessing on tape that he had deliberately lured the team into a beast migration exclusion zone for the hefty compensation and inheritance. And last night's attempts to make me the scapegoat and a disposable victim. The evidence was irrefutable, and news and judicial agencies were stunned instantaneously. This is not only severe illegal poisoning and attempted murder, it's an atrocious cross-border insurance fraud. The arriving sheriff's face went ashen as he issued arrest warrants and orders for a mandatory rescue operation. Down in the deep mountain valley, the tragedy reached its end at dawn. When the rescue team's heavy armored snowcat and search helicopters forced their way into the valley after the blizzard had subsided, the scene was chaotic and horrific. Torn tent remains hung on pines, and the snow was stained large swathes of shocking dark red with blood. Chloe lay in a pool of blood. Her legs had been torn and badly bitten by a beast, her face slashed and disfigured in multiple places, and she had completely broken down mentally from excruciating pain and extreme terror. Even when carried out on a stretcher by rescuers, she screamed hysterically, convulsed, and kept muttering, "Wolves, poison, don't kill me." Her remaining life would be spent not only disabled and in psychiatric care but also facing severe criminal prosecution for attempted poisoning and murder. Lucas's fate was even more tragic. The collapsed heavy tent frame had been trampled by a massive bear and driven through his spine, causing a permanent high paraplegia below the chest. When rescuers carried Lucas out of the snow, his body soaked in blood and his face ashen, his eyes stared vacantly at the sky, gone was his previous arrogant, untouchable air. The sheriff stepped forward with legal documents and coldly snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. "Mr. Lucas, you are suspected of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and illegal interference with polar rescue operations. Once your condition is stable, you will be transferred to judicial authorities and face no less than 20 years in prison. Moreover, because of my exposure, Lucas's family conglomerate's stock plummeted at the base's press conference. The sizable insurance payout was permanently frozen, and he now faced massive compensation lawsuits and the complete bankruptcy of his family." 3 weeks later, at the base down the mountain, I stood by the sunlit polar airstrip in a neat black coat, facing the chilly wind. Beside me, the airport's large screen was playing the latest developments in the polar murder case. Chloe and Lucas had both been sentenced to heavy penalties and were awaiting their life sentences. The airliner's cabin doors slowly closed, shutting out the polar blast and biting ice crystals. I sat in the window seat of first class, carefully stowing the high-strength black box storage card from my backpack. Outside the window, the vast snowy plain that had once witnessed countless conspiracies and despair was visibly shrinking from view, eventually becoming a pure, distant white outline. A flight attendant smiled and handed me a cup of warm lemon water. "Ma'am, you look well. This polar expedition must have been very fruitful, right?" "Yes, very fruitful." I took the paper cup, sipped the warm water, and looked out with calm, deep eyes. I not only retrieved what was lost, I also wiped out a few wolves lurking in the dark. The plane climbed into the clouds, piercing through thick stratocumulus. Sunlight glinted off the wings, refracting dazzling golden rays. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away in a bustling metropolis, the storm was only just beginning to roll into a real deluge. Major financial and legal news channels were running around-the-clock coverage of the latest developments in the Polar Expedition's major intentional homicide and transnational insurance fraud case. On screen, reporters and angry shareholders crowded in front of the family company building where Lucas worked, drawn by the breaking news. With the core scandal fully exposed and the chain of evidence ironclad, the group's stock plunged to the daily limit at opening, facing a debt collapse on the order of hundreds of billions in creditor lawsuits. Those business rivals who had once clung to the Lucas family, hoping to besiege and swallow my family's company on the capital market, were now like frightened birds, hastily distancing themselves for fear of being swept up by this sudden judicial earthquake. Cause and effect. Retribution is precise. The despair and destruction they inflicted on me in a past life had now been returned to them twofold. Hours later, the plane landed smoothly at the international airport. No sooner had I exited the VIP corridor than several family core executives and legal advisors in formal attire, their expressions respectful, came to meet me. "Young miss, you're finally back." Uncle Wang, who led them, hurried forward, took the suitcase from my hand, his eyes full of admiration and relief. "All internal crises have been resolved. Those traitors who shifted with the wind have now been lawfully expelled from the board. All assets and projects have been fully returned to your name." I stopped, turned my face to the city's warm, bright sunlight, and slowly pushed my sunglasses up onto my forehead. "Let's go back to the company," I said lightly, my voice carrying an invincible control born of having faced life and death. "Our era is only just beginning." I got into the Rolls-Royce that had been waiting outside, and the motorcade slowly drove onto the bustling elevated highway. A luxury business car came to a slow stop on Financial Street, where office towers stood in rows. The door opened. I stepped onto the pavement in high heels, my sharply tailored black suit glinting coldly and confidently in the sunlight. Uncle Wang and several key executives were already waiting by the revolving doors. As I approached, they all bowed slightly in unison, their eyes full of awe and submission. "Miss, the board has been convened for an emergency meeting. All implicated directors are waiting in the conference room," Uncle Wang reported in a low voice. "Good." I walked into the building without looking aside. "Notify the legal department and bring all the acquisition and liquidation contracts. Today, we close the net." When I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors of the executive boardroom on the top floor, the previously noisy arguments stopped abruptly. The directors seated along both sides of the long table wore varying expressions, some terrified, some obsequious, others ashen. Just 3 days ago, with the final verdict in the Polar cross-border insurance fraud and murder case, the Lucas family had been declared bankrupt and dissolved. The board members who had secretly colluded with Lucas, attempting to marginalize my father and jointly swallow our family business, now sat trembling in their seats, too afraid to make a sound. I walked to the chairman's seat and sat down with composure, my sharp gaze sweeping slowly across everyone present. "Everyone, long time no see." I folded my hands on the table. My tone was calm but carried an irresistible pressure. "It seems you've all been paying attention to yesterday's verdict. Why so quiet now? A few days ago, when you banded together to force a takeover, you were all so full of swagger." Director Zhang, sitting to my left, turned pale and trembled to his feet. Miss, this is all a misunderstanding. We were deceived by that bastard Lucas. Those share transfer agreements were signed under his coercion and temptation. It's got nothing to do with us." "Nothing to do with you?" I sneered and gave a look to the legal director behind me. A thick file was slapped precisely down in front of Director Zhang. "This is the full chain of evidence of your secret transfer of the company's core technical data, embezzlement of public funds, and malicious collusion with illegal overseas capital. Every signature and seal was put on by your own hands. Now tell me, is this a misunderstanding? Zhang's legs went weak. He collapsed back into his chair, ashen and speechless. The company has always been strict with rewards and punishments. I stood, looking down at everyone in the room. I'll give you two choices. First, immediately and unconditionally hand over all your shares, leave with nothing, and cooperate with the police in the economic crime investigation. Second, be prosecuted by the legal department for embezzlement and industrial espionage and sent to prison, where you will spend the rest of your life behind bars. You have 1 minute to decide. The room fell into a dead silence. 10 seconds later someone broke down and, trembling, raised a hand. I'll sign the share transfer agreement, please spare me, miss. Seeing one person go first, the other treacherous directors one by one signed the transfer contracts ashen-faced. With that, all internal threats to the family business were completely eliminated, and full control was returned to me 100%. At the same time, thousands of kilometers away in a cold prison visitation room, Lucas sat in a wheelchair, eyes hollow and features gaunt, with a permanently high spinal cord injury leaving him paralyzed and multiple sentences to be served consecutively. He had been given life without parole, there would be no comeback. When the guard pushed open the visitation room door, he lifted his head numbly and saw a face that would wake him screaming from nightmares, mine. I stood in a trench coat on the other side of the bulletproof glass, looking down at him. What? Surprised to see me, Lucas? I picked up the speaking tube, and the voice passed through the loudspeaker into his ears, cold and derisive. Lucas trembled violently, his eyes bursting with endless malice and madness. He frantically pounded the armrest of the wheelchair and roared into the microphone. Elena! You bitch! It's you! All of this is your scheme. You knew long ago we would target you. You deliberately led us to the polar regions. You ruined my life. The one who ruined your life was never me. I lifted the coffee cup, my tone as calm as if discussing the weather. In the previous life, when you pushed me off the cliff and left me to despair and suffocate in the ice and snow, did you ever think there would be a today? I am merely returning to you the suffering you imposed on me, multiplied. You won't die a good death. I'll kill you. I will. Lucas wailed hysterically, spit splattering on the glass. However, his roar seemed so pale and powerless before the thick bulletproof glass and the cold reality. 2 fully armed prison guards coldly stepped forward, directly pinning the emotionally out-of-control Lucas back into the wheelchair, mercilessly dragging him out of the interrogation room. Watching his torn and desperate howls, I slowly lowered the microphone, a hint of relief curving my lips. The final chapter of revenge, thus perfectly concluded. 1 month later, a grand corporate banquet was held in a revolving restaurant at the city's summit. Business elites and magnates gathered, all eyes filled with reverence and flattery focusing on tonight's undeniable protagonist. I wore an expensive high-fashion starry evening gown, gracefully holding a champagne glass, weaving among the guests. Those once snarling enemies had long since vanished, replaced by an even larger and sturdier commercial empire. Elena Zhou, congratulations on your successful acquisition of the overseas new energy project. Now your business footprint is truly unmatched. An industry titan came over with a toast, his face filled with flattery. Thank you. I lightly clinked glasses with him, took a small sip, and wore a poised and distant smile. Half a year had slipped away quietly amid busyness and calm. The sensational polar transnational murder and insurance fraud case that had gripped the nation gradually faded from the public's lively dinner table discussions after the ringleader Lucas was executed and Chloe was placed in long-term confinement and treatment, becoming a textbook classic widely cited in business and legal circles. The family business I ran, after that shocking purge and reorganization, not only firmly regained its leading industry position but also successfully rode the wave of transformation in the global new energy and polar research supply chains, ushering in explosive high-speed growth. In the early morning, the first ray of sunlight pierced the floor-to-ceiling windows and fell across the spacious, bright chairman's office. I stood before the full-length mirror, carefully straightening the tailored gray-blue cashmere suit I was wearing. On the desk lay a senior honorary advisor appointment letter that had just arrived from the International Polar Foundation. There was a soft knock at the door. Uncle Wang entered holding a stack of the latest financial statements and the schedule. Miss, Here is the revenue summary for this quarter from our global branches. Also, the International Polar Science Expedition Foundation has sent an official letter inviting you as a special guest to attend next month's Global Environmental Protection and Extreme Environment Safety Summit in Iceland. Uncle Wang set the documents on the desk, unable to hide his admiration and respect in his tone. I opened the appointment letter and let my gaze rest on the clear seal, nodding slightly. Confirm we'll attend the Iceland summit and accept the invitation. Also, arrange me a flight to Reykjavik next week. All right, Mississippi. But Uncle Wang hesitated for a moment, speaking with some reluctance. I heard some familiar faces from that time will be at the summit, like Mark, the security officer who was in charge of the rescue. He has always wanted to thank you in person. I turned, picked up the coffee on the desk, and gazed through the clear liquid at the blue sky outside, a faint, untroubled smile playing at the corners of my mouth. What's past has long since blown away. Meeting him won't hurt, consider it giving that cold polar memory a proper full stop. 2 days later, I boarded a private jet and set off once more for the Arctic Circle of Northern Europe. The plane glided steadily above a blanket of white clouds. This time, the view outside the window was no longer the perilous no-man's land filled with betrayal and bloodshed, but an immense, tranquil, magnificent expanse of blue sky and cloud seas. Thinking back on everything since my rebirth, from cautious moves in desperate circumstances to a decisive counterattack, to now holding the reins of power and standing above my rivals, I had cut through every thorn and conspiracy with clear-headedness and reason. When the plane touched down at Reykjavik Airport, the cabin door opened and the crisp, pure northern air rushed in. I stepped out onto the air stair, facing the free wind. The polar air in Reykjavik, Iceland carried a purity and sharpness that seemed to wash the soul clean. After attending the specially invited guests' summit of the International Polar Science Investigation Foundation, I declined the string of dinner invitations from local political and business elites and drove alone to a private viewing platform on the outskirts of the town of Vik. At the edge where polar night and polar day alternate, the sky took on an extraordinarily rare deep indigo. Ms. Elena, long time no see. A steady, gentle voice came from behind. I turned and saw Mark, who had served as chief safety officer during the polar blizzard, walking toward me in a heavy cold-weather parka. There was a touch of silver at his temples compared to back then, but his eyes were still as resolute and clear as ever. I smiled slightly and lifted the hot coffee in my hand. Leader Mark, long time no see. It seems your polar research career is still thriving. Mark stopped at the wooden railing beside me, his gaze also fixed on the sky being gradually ignited by night. Not as much as yours. Back at the Storm's base camp, I knew you were not ordinary. I just didn't expect that in a little over a year you would not only straighten out your family business but also become the largest private donor to the International Polar Environmental and Safety Foundation. People must move forward. I took a gentle sip of the warm coffee, my tone calm and resigned. Those who've stood on the edge of life and death understand what the most precious scenes in life are. That storm didn't just sweep away all the demons and monsters. It made me see the path beneath my feet clearly. As I spoke, a whisper of pale green light suddenly rose in the distant night sky. Then a second and third band of brilliant light unfurled and interwove like silk across the heavens, bathing the glaciers and snow-capped mountains in a dreamlike glow. It was the polar realm's most magnificent spectacle, the aurora borealis. Beautiful, Mark said sincerely, watching the sky. This time, no plots, no betrayals. Only the purest nature and rebirth. Yes, the purest rebirth. I lifted my head and let the splendid aurora reflect deep in my eyes. At the same time, thousands of kilometers away in a cold, dark maximum security prison, inside a single-person cell. The walls were cold concrete, and above only a palm-sized high window barred with iron. Outside, the aurora and starry sky were equally brilliant, but this world knew only despair and deathly silence. Lucas slumped in a specially made medical wheelchair. Years of high-level paralysis and long-term lack of sunlight had left his face with a sickly pallor. The once arrogant wealthy heir was now but a gaunt husk. The cell's heavy iron door was slowly pushed open. A guard walked in coldly and tossed the latest overseas business paper onto his knees. Lucas lowered his head numbly. His murky gaze fell on the high-resolution photograph on the paper's front-page headline. The photo showed me attending the international summit in Reykjavik. In the frame I wore a neatly tailored navy blue wool coat, my long hair fluttering in the wind, facing the dazzling aurora with a composed, confident, dazzling smile at the corner of my mouth. That powerful aura of looking down on the world could pierce his eyes even through the paper. Beneath the photo, the bold headline read, Chinese young entrepreneur Elena re-elected as Global Honorary Advisor of the International Polar Environmental Foundation. Her energy business empire's market value breaks 100 billion. Ha 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 ha. Looking at that radiant figure on the paper, Lucas suddenly laughed nervously, his laughter laced with endless remorse, despair, and madness. He frantically scraped at the newspaper with his gaunt fingers, tearing it to pieces, tears mixed with snot surging out of his sunken eye sockets. Why? Why can she stand at the top of the world, while I rot in this sunless mire? He roared in despair, his voice echoing through the empty, cold cell, sounding so bitter and hollow. Unfortunately, there is no cure for regret in this world. The bitter fruits he had sown with his own hands must now be painfully repaid with every minute and every second of the rest of his life. And the girl he once treated like an ant and trampled at will had long since ridden the wind and waves, leaving him far behind in a span of time so distant that even her silhouette could not be reached. The Icelandic night wind howled by, carrying the fresh scent unique to snow and ice. After saying goodbye to Mark, I walked alone along the snow-covered viewing path. My phone in my pocket vibrated lightly. It was Uncle Wang sending the multinational group's quarterly financial report and an update on preparations for next quarter's global new energy public welfare projects. I stopped, and with a crisp motion replied on the phone screen with 3 words. Proceed as planned. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket, looked up, and facing the vast, brilliant aurora stretching across the sky, I took a deep breath of the cool, free air. The bone-chilling, world-destroying blizzard of my past life had long since been buried in the dust of time. In this life, I row with wisdom and sail with calm. Not only did I tear apart every scheme and betrayal with my own hands, I also seized the highest authority over my fate firmly in my grasp. The long polar winter has finally ended, and the vast world and boundless sea of stars that belong to me have only just begun to play their most staggering overture. Extra. On the edge of the Arctic Circle, the polar night in Reykjavik, Iceland arrived on schedule. This is an arrogant city where wind, snow, and volcanoes coexist, the air forever carrying a piercing chill that seems to cleanse the soul. The sky is studded with stars like broken diamonds set in a midnight blue canopy, and at the horizon where earth meets sky, a wisp of pale green aurora silently unfurls, like some ancient, mysterious life whispering across the vault of heaven. I stand before the giant panoramic floor-to-ceiling window of a private observatory, draped in a deep gray cashmere shawl. In my hand, a delicate white porcelain cup releases tendrils of hot cocoa steam, which mingle with the bone-freezing air outside to create a strange contrast of warmth. On the desk lie several white papers quietly signed by the International Polar Research Organization, IPRO, together with the world's top research institutions, clearly bearing my signature as honorary chief advisor. Beside them is the latest progress report on the Global Clean Energy and Polar Ecological Restoration Project. The multinational commercial empire I personally preside over has now become the undisputed leader in global environmental protection and energy technology. Soft, steady footsteps come from behind. Miss, it's late, and the wind outside is strong. Uncle Wang drapes a thicker cold-weather coat over my shoulders, his tone filled with concern and respect that years have tempered into habit. The Foundation just sent an encrypted fax. The new quarter's Global Polar Scientific and Environmental Protection Fund has been fully allocated, and the first batch of supplies has been successfully delivered to the Greenland Research Station. I turn, setting my hot cocoa on the table, my gaze calm and deep. There were no gaps in the logistics? Rest assured, all procedures are personally monitored by legal and the special commissioners, absolutely foolproof. Uncle Wang bows slightly, then can't help but sigh in admiration. To be honest, seeing the group flourish like this now, and thinking back to the days when you went to the polar regions alone and almost perished, it's like a different lifetime. A different lifetime? I laugh softly, moving back to the window and casting my eyes once more over the vast night. To me, that's not the past but an anchor that reminds me to stay clear-headed. Yes, like a different lifetime. Only I know most clearly the transformation I underwent when I woke from that cold nightmare, betrayed in a blizzard, poisoned, ravaged by sepsis, and facing a despair that felt like death. The weakness and blind trust of my former life led only to abysses and vanished bones. In this life, with absolute composure, meticulous planning, and undeniable strength, I sent those who sought to consume me to the hell they deserved. From that life and death ordeal, I not only reclaimed my family's highest authority but also carved a bloody path through the murderous storms of corporate warfare. By the way, Uncle Wang says, as if remembering something, extracting an invitation from his folder. The Global Economic Summit in Zurich next month, the organizers hope you'll be the closing speaker on corporate resilience and capital gains in extreme environments. This is the preliminary schedule. Would you like any adjustments? I take the invitation, skim the densely packed agenda, then confidently sign my name. No adjustments. Proceed as planned. I close the pen slowly. My voice is crisp and strong. Business is like war, never stop advancing. The storms I once stood upon beneath my feet, this sea of stars now must yield to my will. Uncle Wang looks at the light flickering in my eyes, genuine admiration and awe showing in his face. Yes, Mississippi. I'll arrange the accompanying team immediately. After he leaves, the spacious observatory returns to its silence. I turned back around and faced alone the magnificent, pure aurora outside the window. The biting cold wind held past the double-layered special glass, but it could no longer touch me in the slightest. The once icy, soul-crushing, hopeless no-man's land has long since transformed into the richest soil nourishing my spirit and will. In this survival of the fittest world, kindness needs the protection of sharpness, and reason is the strongest weapon to overcome every conspiracy. In this life, I am no longer a fate's drifter but the uncrowned player moving the pieces. I lifted my hot cocoa gently, and through the glass I saluted the vast polar snows and the star-filled heavens in the distance. Let storms do what they will. The sea of stars bows to me. My legend has only just begun to play its most stirring overture.